that's exploring contemporary challenges in science communication in Asia. And we're really delighted to welcome our panel of speakers to the session today, who are going to be reflecting on both national, regional and international challenges and perspectives from the context in which they're working, which are a mix of both academic and practice-based contexts from within the region. The session today each speaker will give us a short provocation, about 5 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for general discussion. So I'd like to invite everybody to please use the chat function to offer any comments, or particularly if you've got any questions, if you could please pop those in the chat, and then I can relay those on to the speakers after we've had all the provocations at the start of the session. So we're about ready to begin, and I'd like to invite Kei Kano to be our first speaker. And oh dear, I've just been told I sound like I'm in a hurricane. Have a look and see if I can change my microphone while Kei is speaking. So I'm going to hand over now. Thank you very much, and please welcome our first speaker.
Thank you very much. Can I share my screen? Oh, sorry. Okay. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kei Kano of Shiga University. It is my honor to have a great opportunity to give a presentation here. Thank you for organizing the session, Dr. Nielsen, and thank you for moderating the discussion, Dr. Weitkamp. And I appreciate PCST Science Committee members. Today, I would like to show you science communication situation in Japan. This is the history of science communication policies in Japan. Under the Science and Technology Basic Law, the Science and Technology Basic Plan has been formulated every 5 years. The first 3 terms, beginning in 1996, was the public understanding of science period. Then in 2011, the public engagement with science, technology, and innovation period began. Guess why? 2011, Fukushima nuclear power plant issues have happened after a big earthquake in 2011. Reflections on nuclear power plant policies have led us believe that it is important to make policies together with the public. Then in 2021, the law was amended to emphasize innovation and the importance of humanities and social sciences. In this period, multiple science communications will be strengthened, including efforts of PUS based on social events and social changes caused by the COVID-19, effort to collect opinions from the public at science museums, and effort to engage in dialogue that overcome difference in age, gender, physical ability, values, etc. I mean that diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, will be emphasized in Japanese science communication. In other words, we are shifting from two model to with model shown here. In terms of DEI, here shows the population interest, potential interest, and disinterest in science and technology people. You can see Australian people are more interested in science and technology than Japanese. Our results showed that 84% of Japanese could be unengaged. Through the profile sheet, we can further understand who is unengaged. From the viewpoint of demographics, the typical unengaged people are more likely to be female and low educational background. On the other hand, the engaged people are more likely to be male and earn much money. In terms of women, Japan is the worst country in OECD countries from the viewpoint of entering university of STEM fields shown here. I'm the only man in this webinar, but in Japan, the majority of the speakers for this webinar would be male. Anyway, in response to this worst situation, we Nissan Global Foundation have started awarding for promotion of future women scientists since 2018. I think showing a role model through awarding is a good approach by high-tech companies for women's participation in STEM field. Japanese government has started some events and awards for promoting women in STEM as well. Finally, in contrast to the West, I would like to introduce my effort to incorporate indigenous Japanese knowledge, Kyoto traditional technology into STEM workshops. Here shows an example called kakishibu, fermented persimmon juice which has waterproof, anti-insect and antibacterial features. In Edo period, about 400 years ago, people put the kakishibu onto the umbrella, but the plastic has been used in modern society. The kakishibu technology was no longer being used. Therefore, there are many unknowns in the chemistry of kakishibu. Another example is the secret of green tea breeding. We have tea ceremony culture. When President Biden visited Japan, he was welcomed with a tea ceremony. I think these Japanese indigenous technology or culture would be one of the key points to include the unengaged people. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was a really fascinating insight into some of the challenges around engagement within the Japanese context. I'd like to invite our next speaker, Kamila Navarro, and please do introduce us to your work as well. So thank you very much. We're ready.
All right, just checking if everyone can see my screen, right?
It's working fine.
All right, great. Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Kamila Navarro and I'm a science editor at the National University of Singapore, but I am originally from the Philippines and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to Christian and to PCST for organizing the webinar. So just some background context on the Philippines. It's an archipelago of 7,107 islands in Southeast Asia, and it has a population of around 110 million, of which around 1/4 live under the poverty line. For 300 over years, the Philippines was colonized by the Spaniards and then the Americans for nearly 50 years. So consequently, the Spaniards and the Americans both left a unique cultural and social economic legacy that's evident in the kinds of science that are often communicated today and in the way that science is performed. For instance, given how rich natural resources are in the Philippines, agricultural crops became key exports during the Spanish era, and this continued well into the American era. In turn, the US would import manufactured goods. So this led to Filipinos preferring to import technology on a per-need basis instead of recognizing the long-term value of R&D and innovation. And that has led to delayed industrialization and the relative underdevelopment of other scientific fields and its communication beyond agriculture, medicine, and other related disciplines. Because of this underdevelopment, to this day, many professionals working in or adjacent to science are either unemployed or underemployed, leading to brain drain as many opt to migrate to countries with more readily available opportunities. I personally experienced how science communication opportunities in the Philippines were very scarce with meager pay, which is why I am speaking to you all from Singapore today. So compared to our neighbors in the ASEAN and East Asia, the Philippines has a smaller capacity of scientists and science communicators. As you can see in the slide, there are only 356 researchers per million population in 2018. And because of this lack of a critical mass of scientific talent, that has also led to a lack of visibility of scientists in the national consciousness. So this, along with the recent politicization and polarization of science issues in recent years, makes communicating and advocating for science a tricky affair. So given this, I'll be discussing two examples wherein the complexities of science communication, specifically in science policy, were thrust into the national spotlight in recent years. So perhaps one of the more prominent examples that I hope most people here have heard of would be the 2017 Dengvaxia scandal, and this severely undermined local vaccine confidence. So just some background context, again, this was Dengvaxia was the first dengue vaccine, and it was manufactured by Sanofi past year. The Philippines was the first Asian nation to authorize its commercial use. Not long after around 800,000 Filipino school children had been inoculated, Sanofi then announced that Dengvaxia may actually cause more severe disease in those who had never had the virus. And very quickly, sensationalized accounts of deaths were all over national media, causing widespread panic, confusion, and there was this highly dramatized investigation that was led by none other than the government principal law office. So the parents of the inoculated school children felt that their offspring had been used as test subjects, and this eroded trust across multiple levels. Eroded trust in the Dengvaxia vaccine, eroded trust in the health professionals who were administering the vaccine, as well as trust in those who were making the policies for vaccine rollout. At the same time, there was a lack of clear consensus and unified messaging from the local medical community, and this really enabled the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation related to Dengvaxia, with stark consequences for the Philippines' vaccination programs. So before, the Philippines had high confidence in vaccines historically, with 93% of Filipinos in 2015 strongly agreeing that vaccines were important. However, after the scandal, the confidence levels plummeted to 32%, and it has impacted the ongoing COVID-19 vaccination drive, according to some recent research. So a national survey during the initial stages of the COVID-19 vaccine rollout in March 2021 showed that 60% were unwilling to get vaccinated, and some of these actually included also healthcare workers. To date, only around 63% of the population has been fully inoculated. So yet another example of the undermining of scientific voices and their credibility. An artificial beach made of crushed dolomite was built by the Philippines Environmental Department to rehabilitate the Manila Bay at the height of the pandemic in 2020. So when the marine scientists from the National University pointed out the environmental and financial costs of the project, for instance, that the dolomite would be continuously washed out by storm, they would have to be replenished, or that perhaps there would have been other better interventions like mangroves, these were rejected by the environmental agency, and the scientists were called paid hacks by an official. So I hope that these two examples give a taste to the audience today of some of the conditions within which Filipino scientists and science communication practitioners must engage with. However, there are models of scientific advice and communication that have shown promise, as in the case of the Independent Science Advisory Group OCTA, and their website is shown here, which has provided guidance for the government's COVID-19 response. And they've also recently partnered with a presidential advisor, basically kind of like a minister, in a bid to manage critics from the government. So I will end with that because I'm sure there's lots of room for discussion. Thank you very much. And I look forward to hearing more about the different science communication contexts in Asia.
Thank you very much for a really interesting exploration of a number of the challenges faced around science communication, and particularly when you have a sort of a challenge around poor science communication and how that kind of spills over into wider society. So I'd like to move on now to explore China and invite Professor Wang to tell us about science communication in China. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Emma. And I'll give a brief introduction about science communication in China. Okay, science communication in China also get another name, science popularization. And every Chinese know that. In Chinese, it's 科普. So by looking forward, looking back several historical moments, I'll try to summarize the character and the problems about science communication in China. For thousands of years, China's school education was about literature and art until 1931. Tao Xingzhi initiated the marine science with the public movement. He is a pioneer of science communication in China. And the two core elements of his movement were science popularization and rejuvenation of the country through science education. These two ideas are still very most important in today's Chinese society. And in 1961, there's a book, 100,000 Wives, which is the spiritual food for all the Chinese for more than half a century. Many people in their childhood, including me, got their first scientific knowledge from this book. Until today, there is no comparable book. And in 1978, the National Science Conference established the status of science as the first productive force at the national level. And this was known as the Spring of Science in China, which also had brought about the spring for science communication. Soon after, China witnessed a surge in science communication, including the creation of journals, lots of books, and mass media for science popularization. And in 2002, China issued a very unique law named Science Popularization Law, proposing that science popularization is a common task of the whole society. And soon after, in 2006, the outline of the Civic Scientific Literacy Action proposed. Many science museums have been built and a lot of effort have been done to promote civic scientific literacy. And the new outline of the Civic Scientific Literacy Action was issued just last year, which now emphasizes on the scientific spirit and method instead of scientific knowledge. And then is some critical thinking about science communication in China. And the first one is about utilitarian science. What is science in Chinese society? It is generally believed that science is a weapon that can make a country much stronger. Therefore, in Chinese, science often refers to technology. The utilitarian science leads to utilitarian science communication. That's why science communication is called science popularization, and this also reflects the top-down model of science communication. And for the public, there are more engagement, but less participation in science communication. The model of science communication is always the deficit model. Policymakers believe that as long as the civic scientific literacy is high enough, the citizen will be more willing to accept science and use science to promote development. Well, there are fewer channels and opportunities for the public to participate in scientific decision making. And so one is about science education. Okay, Chinese science education is always exam-oriented. Questions always has a standard answer. And this leads to many Chinese to believe that a conclusion is either completely right or totally wrong. Therefore, it's difficult for most Chinese to understand the risk of controversial science, and this leads to the prevalence of conspiracy theories and numerous scientific rumors in China. And the last one is about online censorship and the great firewall in the internet environment. This leads to the critical thoughts often cannot be spread and often be forbidden. And finally, I will let me introduce our Science Communication Center in Suzhou University. We have 9 faculty members and 12 guest professors, including our Jenny Metcalf. And we'll have a conference, IAMC April conference next month. And we'll have PCST Suzhou Symposium in 2024. So we are looking forward to see you in Suzhou soon. That's all.
Thank you so much for a really interesting tour over the history of science communication and the development of the field in China, and really fascinating to see how strongly the link between science and national development is and driving that move towards science communication. So again, thank you very much. And I'm sure we'll have many questions on all of the talks so far. Just to keep things moving, I'd like to move on to Siyu Fu to talk about her PhD research. So welcome, and we'll look forward to hearing about that.
Hello, can you see it?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah. Hi everyone. Thanks for organizing this webinar, and thanks for all those great speeches. And I'm Siyu Fu, and I'm currently a PhD student in Aarhus University, Denmark. Although I did my master and bachelor degree in China. And today what I'm going to present is the critical score of science communication in China. It is a part of my PhD study. Well, my PhD project is about the transition from science popularization to science communication in 21st century China, or including a school of thinkings and social movements in the past 20 years. Yeah, so the background is that in the past many decades, to boost public scientific literacy, Chinese government gave science popularization numerous cultural and political support. Well, it implies the will of the government more than that of the people themselves. So in at the very first of this century, there are a group of Chinese scholars in area of the history and philosophy of science and also science communication. There are also professors in Chinese top universities, Peking and Tsinghua universities, and then they are unsatisfied. They start to feel unsatisfied with this one-way top-down communication campaign, and they think it's time to embrace science communication, where dialogue and participation based on diverse opinions and the values, and also the need to include elements such as justice, equity, and right. Yeah, so they got inspirations from many resources, including the sociology of scientific knowledge, SSK, phenomenology, postmodernism, and environmentalism. And SSK is the most important among all those resources. And two of the core principles of SSK, naturalism and symmetry, they are mainly adopted. While naturalism refers to the analysis of science and scientific knowledge freed from empirical and or ideological assumption about scientific truth and method, while symmetry means the same types of explanations are used for the successful and unsuccessful scientific knowledge. The adoption of these two principles led to the correction of the view of science as superior to other models of investigation. It means science does not have the absolute authority to explain everything. So thus from here, it starts to imply that anti-scientism and also anti-authority. Well, scientism is one of the prevailing ideologies in contemporary China, and it already directly led to technocracy and went against the reflective and the critical spirit of science. And this group of scholars, they call themselves scientific humanists because they wish to bridge scientism and humanism in contemporary China. They argue that scientism would limit Chinese science popularization to a deficit approach and would not result in expected outcome. And the transition from science popularization to science communication would be impossible to happen. Well, because actually their opinions are highly controversial. They are usually criticized as anti-science or by their opponents. But actually, this paragraph is from the paper that we already finished. So actually, we should address the scientific humanists. They are not against science and technology or any any goals expressed in official policies, in official national policies. They their role was to expose and criticize scientism. They just think there's something faulty. There's some faulty assumptions of science and technologies in Chinese science popularization. So they sought to fix it. Yes, and that's it. That's my presentation. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. So that was a really nice way to pick up from our historical look at development of science communication in China and sort of move on to the contemporary and to the directions in the future. And I think the also some really interesting links there potentially with both our previous speaker Kami and Kei around the way publics are thinking, different kinds of publics are engaging with science and thinking about science. So thank you very much. We have one final speaker. Maha Arujanan, and she's going to speak to us about the situation in Malaysia. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. So I'm going to talk about Malaysia, but very briefly. I only have one slide. This is my title slide, and this is what I'm going to use to speak. I'm going to base on who are the players in Malaysia. I must say Malaysia is still at, I wouldn't say infancy. We are growing in science communication, yet relatively still new, and it all started way long ago. But then what was happening in Malaysia, it's really happening in an ad hoc manner from the beginning, in fact, until now. When there is an issue, when there's a crisis, then people talk about science. And also most of the players in Malaysia are also not full-time science communicators. They are scientists, and they have other roles, and they do science communication out of their own passion. Because the other good thing about Malaysia is we see that the realization that science communication is important is there among scientists. So we see a lot of scientists doing it on their own. Now, so these are the players. I am from Malaysian Biotechnology Information Center, or MABIC, and MABIC is probably the only organization in Malaysia that is dedicated full-time for science communication. We are not for profit, and we tackle all areas of sciences, especially biological sciences. But it's not just about making science cool and fun to the public or to school children, but it's also heavyweight science communication, like influencing policies and regulations, and also tackling sensitive issues. I must say here that Malaysia can be a bit unique compared to other countries. But I know this issue also came out in the Philippines many years ago, where religion plays a very big role. We are predominantly Muslim, we are a Muslim country. So when there are new emerging technologies, then the issue of whether it's haram or halal is a big thing. For example, it was an issue with genetically modified organisms. And then recently during the pandemic, the vaccine was also questioned. And there was a lot of resistance because the new vaccine was seen to be haram or non-permissible. So, we in Malaysia, if we are involved in science communication, then we have to tackle also these issues. So Marbik, we do that. And then under Marbik, what we did was I founded the first science newspaper in Malaysia. It's called the Petri Dish. It started as a biological science newspaper, but then we are expanding it to other sciences as well. And it's available print and online. So this, the Petri Dish has really introduced or brought science to the public domain, and we are very happy that it has also it has got a lot of traction among non-technical people now. It's available in public places like Starbucks, airports, hotels, car service centers, hotels, and shopping malls, private hospitals. And then we also co-founded the Science Media Center, emulating the Science Media Center in the UK to bridge scientists and the media, so that media has a platform where they can get the news and also then go further to probe the scientists more for dig further for more news. The Academy of Science and Young Scientists Network play a big role as well. But again, of course, we all know Academy of Science and Science Network, Young Scientists Network are not full-time science communicators, but there's a lot of talent there and of course, expertise there. Young Scientists Network does a lot of work. For example, I don't think they've started again, but before the pandemic, they had Science Cafe, where they go to popular cafes and then they have experts really lemonizing science. I think that was a really good thing. They also just recently published a science communication module. And then Young Scientist Academy, Academy of Science also has this st.my. So this used to be a print science magazine, mainly for the public meaning it's really for school children and parents and teachers. And now they are doing it as online, and Marbik is the implementer of this project now. So I'm on the editorial board of st.my. And there is a group of scientists in Malaysia as well, especially all the young scientists. They have Majalah Science. Majalah in Malay, it actually means magazine. So it's actually science magazine, and also again lemonizing science, and they have got very active social media as well. There's also another loose organization. It's National STEM Movement. Again, scientists, researchers coming together, and they do a lot of exhibitions and talks and hands-on experience to especially students and teachers. Then MOSTI, Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation, does the survey for every 5 years once, public understanding of science. And they also have a big unit on culturalization of science. So how do you make science as a culture? University of Malaya, recently, they have the first science communication master's program. And I think this is really a welcome move, where it is an academic program now. It is under the Faculty of Science, under the Department of Science, Technology, Studies, where I did my PhD. So I think this is a real big move, and it's a very good move as well. So basically, these are the players, and this is what's happening in Malaysia. I'll be happy to talk more when there are other questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and wonderful whistle-stop tour of the different types of organizations that are involved in science communication in Malaysia, and really fascinating to hear also about the development of science communication programs, which might be something we want to pick up as well. Can I invite all the speakers to please pop your cameras on, and we'll move on to look at the questions. I have already noted that there are a number of different questions in the chat already, which is great to see. But I wanted to take the chair's prerogative and really ask the first question, which I think all of you might like to address in different ways. So a number of the things that have cropped up as challenges that you face in your region, they're not all the same, but they're all similar, I think, and I'd quite like you to perhaps reflect on them. But I spotted religion, I spotted gender, I spotted geography in terms of rural and urban divides, and I'm sure there are a number of other things that are challenging science communicators in your different regions. So I wonder if each of you might like to reflect on what are the most important socio-demographic challenges that you face as science communicators or science communication researchers in your different regions. Would anybody like to volunteer to tackle that one first? You can just pop your microphone on if you're prepared to tackle my difficult question there around particular socio-demographic challenges that you face. Professor Wang, I can see your microphone is on. Would you like to start?
Okay. I've just noticed that Kristen is asking a question. Okay. May I just answer her question first? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I thanks Kristen. She asked that have criticisms of science popularization model made an impact on official policies and authorities. I shall say that unfortunately, even the authorities knows that the science popularization model is not the international model in nowadays, but they don't have more confidence or attempt to change the model, because I think it's far in the root of Chinese ideology management. Okay, so well, I have mentioned that let me say the outline of scientific literacy action, and they just change a little for the new outline, and change from the public's scientific knowledge communication into public scientific methods and scientific spirit. But as in Chinese, the government, okay, they are not willing to listen to many different voices that may make people headache, especially on the internet environment. So I think the thing will change. There's little opportunity for things will change in the near future. Okay.
I saw Siyu, you were nodding there. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I just thanks very much for the answer given by Professor Wang. I actually totally agree with you. And I think I think I have some bullet point that I can give to the questions. I think for the first question, have a criticism of the science popularization model made any impact on official policies and on the and also the authorities? I think Professor Wang is right. It's like the will of the nation is too overwhelming, and especially in recent years, the online censorship, and also it's like everything is like it goes into a direction that more and more conservative, and yeah, and also well, if not, why? And I think maybe they just don't have what should I say, reason to change. If this works, why change? I don't know, Professor Wang. I don't have much knowledge in this policy making area. Yeah, and I think what's the future and perspective for this public engagement with science approach in China? Well, I think according to one Chinese professor, Wu Guosheng, he claims that currently the different models, they coexist in China. The deficit mode, science popularization, and also the PUS, public engage with science, engagement with science mode. So but it's just the later one, the PUS mode, is basically a non-official. It wasn't adopted by the authority. It exists in in the society, for example, adopted by NGO and independent researchers, people who agree with that, agree with the PUS ideas. Yeah, so it's actually very scattered. Yeah, so that's it. Thanks very much. Yes.
Thank you. I think there's a related question actually for Cami around policy. which is related to the brain drain question. Although the question is actually about who does the science communicating in the Philippines, I wondered if there's also any policy change or any policy direction that's supporting science communication in the Philippines, given the problem of the brain drain.
Yep, absolutely. So interestingly, now there is a call for proposals to help develop a science communication framework finally. And since the call for proposals is open, I guess we'll only be seeing the results of this maybe, a year or 5 years from now. So it's still very much in the early stages and very ad hoc. So actually, when I was listening to Maha's talk, I was just nodding pretty much with every sentence she said, because it was very familiar. It felt like a very familiar situation. So to answer the question about who does the science communication in the Philippines, it is ad hoc. So we have the government, the Department of Science and Technology. They do engage in science communication, as well as for instance, the Development Communication, College of Development Communication. So in the Philippines, the communication of science is actually rooted in agricultural communication, again, because of that, colonial legacy. And so in Los Baños, which is a province just outside Manila, it's developed into this discipline of development communication, and they have a college of science communication that does engage in this training. However, unlike in Malaysia, there's no dedicated masters of science communication. So that kind of science communication that they do is largely participatory, more of, on the ground contact with these farmers. And it's not, say, the media centric, the kind of TV shows that most people would often associate with science communication. But yes, there's a lot of different actors, mostly ad hoc.
Emma,
similar again to Maha's situation, and I was just going to invite you in to talk about that, and how has Malaysia sort of really pushed that forward?
Emma, I want to add on to that question in the Philippines, because my parent institute, the regional office, is in the Philippines, in Los Baños, hosted by IRI, International Rice Research Institute. And we do a lot of science communication, but then it's all focused on agri-biotechnology. But then we do, farmers and public, students, regulators. So we do that, but only agri-biotechnology.
And in terms of the shaping of the science communication context in which you work in Malaysia, has policy played a big role in the generation of the different networks? Because you have quite a range of different networks, quite a nice diverse ecosystem now.
Yeah, I think the ecosystem is there, but as Kemi and I were saying, it's all ad hoc. There is no policies. I see something in Japan and in China. It's really envious, actually. There's no policy, a top-down approach with a national science communication policy. It all comes under science and the other policies, where science communication is embedded into those policies. So, like, for me, I'm a big advocate of a national science communication policy. So it's enshrined, and then we can, it becomes a commitment for players to really take on this role. So not yet.
Thank you very much. I have a question from Michelle Riedlinger for Professor Kano in particular, and she asks, can you say a little bit more about how science communication changed after the Fukushima incident? And she says, I know there was a community criticism of government and communication, and community organizations like SafeCast sprang up to crowdsource radiation measurements and communicate using these homegrown radiation maps to the communities. So has that enthusiasm for community and citizen science continued, and how has that broadly impacted the activities in Japan?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. And it's very difficult question, but I think this is not in the context of citizen science, but in the context of trust in science. So let me show you a paper. Can I share my screen? So this is a paper in Science in 2012. So the title is rebuilding public trust in science and policy making. So this is an interesting figure you can see. So after Fukushima nuclear power plant issues, so the trust in scientists was very depressing. So this is the big problem in making policy of science communication in Japan. So we should more focus on rebuilding the public trust in scientists, and also you know public engagement and public citizen science and open science will be more popular in Japan to rebuild the public trust in scientists, and but we still have many problems, many issues to open up the public engagement and open science or citizen science. So there are a few practitioners, and there are few examples of citizen science. So I think citizen science is not so popular in Japan.
Thank you very much. I think that's quite sad how such an incident can affect the sort of public trust in science. And I guess, Kemi, you have a similar experience with vaccination in the Philippines. I don't know if there's anything you'd want to add to sort of link those two thoughts together.
Yeah, absolutely. So one interesting, because earlier, we had mentioned the socioeconomic, if we had anything to comment about that. And a recent study actually showed that there was indeed an urban and rural divide when it came to their perceptions in vaccination. And this is because, for instance, the Philippines, as mentioned, there's 7,107 islands. It's far from a monolingual and monolithic culture. There's over 120 languages, and you have locales that range from urbanized cities to these fishing villages which have barely access to utilities or the internet. So in the study, they saw that, interestingly enough, some of the rural respondents actually weren't so opposed to the dengue vaccine, and this is because they saw it more as an urban problem, something that only happened in the capital. So it's just interesting to see how different the lived experiences of these respondents could be, and especially when they perceive of the situation as something, I guess, alien to them and not really applicable to their current situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really, really fascinating kind of insights coming through, and also that the sort of challenges when you have such a dispersed country and so many different languages to be dealing with as well. So I think quite a lot of challenges there. I'd like to pick up on something that Maha mentioned about religion, and Tosca's going to ask all the speakers to just reflect on how important religion and superstition are in influencing science and science communication in your region. And Maha, since you specifically raised it, let's start with you, and then we'll go round.
Okay. It plays a big role. In fact, I was presenting that the Ministry of Science in Malaysia does this public survey, and in that survey they do ask about astrology, astronomy, and which is science, which is not science. So that is already embedded into the survey. And basically, I'm not sure how to answer this question, because human behavior is very, very unique. I'm a scientist, I'm a trained scientist, I'm a science communicator, but I come from a culture where we believe in astrology. So if you ask me, I do believe in astrology. If you ask me why, I've got no answer to it, although I'm a scientist. So, it is difficult. So I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but how do we communicate science and which is superstitious? So I really don't know how to answer this question. But when it comes to really where we can really vaccine, for example, I think it's very easy to say this is really science, and you can't be drinking some garlic tea or ginger tea and expect your immunity to go up. I think that is easier to rebut and it's easier to address. But when it comes to something that's culturally embedded in our life, it's still difficult. And I'm also a culprit in that. I hope I made myself clear.
Absolutely. I think sometimes that's almost about how do you uncover those things that are so embedded in the culture that you just take them for granted, and how does that then influence your practice? Really interesting. Kei, would you like to speak to that question of whether religion or superstition are important in your context?
Okay, thank you very much. So, in fact, many Japanese do not have a specific religion, so it's very difficult to answer about the religion, but pseudoscience and fake news are still a problem in Japan. So, for example, in COVID-19 problem, so vaccination, in terms of vaccination, so people are very confused with the information, including fake news or something. So it's still problematic in Japan.
Yeah. And how about in China? Professor Wang, would you like to start off with that one?
I have done a little research and I haven't noticed very much about religions in science communication. But I noticed that Smarty has a very interesting question. Smarty's question: how has public engagement in science research through citizen science influenced the everyday people engage with science and science communication? Might just give some comments for this for this question. Ima?
Let's finish off on the religious question, because I was going to come to this question next.
Okay.
If that's okay, because I'm sure that Kami would like to speak to the question about religion, and then we can come back to the popularization question.
Okay.
Yeah. So in contrast to Malaysia, where it's majority Islam, of course, in the Philippines, it's majority Catholic. And, you can see, for instance, even in science, high schools, universities, it'll always begin with a prayer most of the time. And you have, even scientists indulging in local superstitions. But I guess when it comes to practice, for instance, back in maybe the early 2000s, there was controversy over genetically modified crops in the Philippines, and the Roman Catholic Church was quite against it. Eventually, the ruling was reversed, and they did allow the field tests of the BT eggplants to push through. But for instance, the Vatican, they had to declare that, oh yes, its GM crops are beneficial. And then now with the current COVID-19 pandemic, the Catholic Church has also been, promoting, let's say, vaccine equity. So they haven't been against vaccination per se, but I think when it comes to issues, for instance, like sexual health practices, like the usage of condoms and all that, of course, there's still, the controversy that I think we all know about, and it's still very pervasive in the Philippines, which is why we have higher rates of teenage pregnancies and the like.
And I guess that just speaks to the need to think about how you're going to handle those stakeholders when you're doing your communication in terms of, well, okay, so some things we can work with the church, other things we're providing other information and navigating a sort of tricky line and tightrope places.
Emma,
absolutely.
If I can add on to the discussion and also what Kami was saying, in the Philippines, in fact, my organization, ISA, had a very tough battle with the churches, like what Kami was saying, for genetic modification. Now, whether it's Catholic or Muslims or any other religion, I think because I've handled these sensitive issues, the best way is to not confronting and not really being biased towards science, but then going back to the religion. And of course, we can't do it if we are not the learned scholar in that religion. So what I do is I go back to the learned scholars in that whichever religion I'm trying to engage with, and then we use their references as the credible sources. So in Malaysia, for example, it's the Quran, it's the Hadith. And then of course in Catholics, it's the Bible. And someone is also asking the question, how do we do it in the Indian context? So if we go back to our verses, our scriptures, and we use that as the to interpret science, I think to me, the way I see a lot of religion, I don't know if everyone will agree with me, has got scientific components in it. And if we can interpret that using science, and then the religion also becomes logical. So I think that's what I want to say. There's, in fact, when I was engaging with the Islamic scholars, they told us that genetics was already discussed in Quran many years ago. So how do now, of course, at that time there was no genetic modification, but how do we now interpret that to discuss current technologies like gene editing and genetic modification? So that is how we can handle science without confronting our audience. So I think that answers also Siyu's question on how do we do it in Indian context. I do it with my children. We are quite a religious family, and when they say, why are we still doing this? Children can be, so I discuss that in the scientific, along the scientific line. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, and really nice way of thinking through how you can handle what can be really, really difficult discussions. I think I do want to give Professor Wang a chance to answer the question about citizen science that we've had from Smarty Safaya, and that is really about how public engagement with science research through citizen science influence the everyday people. And so would you like to just give us your thoughts on that? We only have about 3 minutes left. So
okay,
yeah.
I'll give a very brief compliment. Okay, in the web media environment on the internet, citizen science have made much progress in China. We know that about 95% of Chinese got a smartphone, and most of them, almost everyone of them, use the internet, use the new media. So, which is an important supplement for the government's one-way model of science communication, because the public can have channels on the online to speak and to communicate. Especially, there are many large knowledge sharing platforms, question answer platforms online, such as Zhihu and Baidu Knows, which can communicate science communication constantly, and they produce a large amount of scientific knowledge every day to answer various questions by the public. So that may be an important supplement for the official sources. And nowadays, the government pay more and more attention for the online discussing and online information, and which may have some efforts to do and with the public, with the government science communication. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for really really interesting insights from these different regions. We're just at the end of the session, and I've been alerted to the fact that it's Tos Gascoigne's birthday. So I'm just wondering if everybody in the audience would like to pop their cameras on, and we can do a collective happy birthday wish before we close the session. Would everybody like to just quickly pop their cameras on and their microphones on, and I'll count us down. 1, 2, 3. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
Thank you so much, everyone. We're just at the hour now, so it's time to close the session. Can I thank my wonderful speakers for a really, really interesting and insightful session. Thank you so much. So a big clap for everybody.